Hi, everyone. Welcome to another other talk within the Nine-Sided Circle. I'm one of your two hosts, Noor Kyle.
And I am her faithful sidekick, Mushtaq Ali.
Always faithful. Um, like I said, this is our other talk. So, as many of you know, we do weekly Sunday talks every Sunday evening Pacific time. That's 6:30 p.m. But once a month, every third Sunday morning for us at 10:30 a.m., we do an alternative time talk so that the people who can't make our usual time can have an opportunity to join in with us live when we do our Zoom calls that we love to spend time together and learn together on. And if this time works better for you, you can perhaps check out our email list or our Facebook group, and you'll be able to join in with everyone who is meeting with us today. Other than that, of course, we have to do our YouTube spiel, which means you know the drill, the whole like, comment, subscribe thing.
And hit the notifications button.
Notification bell, yes.
We
All
all
of those
forget that one.
things keep us connected and allow us to continue to grow our channel. All of our content on here is free, obviously, and we love to share what we know. This is how we do that.
Yeah. We like to tell the secrets that nobody else wants to tell.
Yes. But if you'd love to support us in that work, you have the opportunity to donate or to get a t-shirt even. We have all of the links for these things, including the Facebook group and our Facebook page and our email list, which we encourage you to join because these days you never know when social media is going to go bottom up, right? So we have to count on each other to take charge of these connections. All right. So, anything you want to add, Mushtaq?
Um, no.
All right, cool.
Oh, there is
So,
one thing we should add.
what's that?
Um, One way to work with us, and probably the
Oh,
best way to
yes.
work with us, is through um, private consultation.
Thank you for mentioning that, Mushtaq.
Yes, and
Yes.
I think that Noor has a couple of slots open right now. I may have one open for clients, but I think you have two. So,
Yes. I have two openings and I would love to get to know you. So please, you can sign up for a uh we kind of call it a
yeah,
curiosity session to see if we're a good fit for one another. And if we are, then I am happy to offer counseling and mentorship. So,
and we'll
hopefully,
tell you the secrets of the universe.
such as they are, yes. So, you can check back with us via email or via Facebook Messenger, basically, and we will connect you with our calendars and, all of the details that you'll need for that. All right. So, this morning, what are we talking about, Mushtaq?
We are talking about hypnosis, Legominisms, and the repatterning of awareness through Sufi stories.
Mm-hmm. And today's kind of a two-parter, isn't it?
Yes, it is. This morning, we are going to talk about the process. This evening, we are going to tell you a story.
Yeah. Someone was mentioning to us recently that they really enjoy the talks we do that involve storytelling.
Yeah,
So,
so do we,
yeah.
actually.
So, tonight's talk goes out to that person, and hopefully all of us will benefit too. All right, so let's talk about the power of story this morning and Legominisms and
Hypnosis. Let's
repatterning.
start with
Yeah.
hypnosis.
Start
Because,
simple, right?
yeah. So the word hypnosis was coined back in the 19th century. 18th century, 18th century by some dude who didn't want to call it animal magnetism. Hypnosis in the West starts with Franz Anton Mesmer, who was a Viennese physician, lawyer, cleric, did all sorts of things. Very interesting fellow. Um, had a natural gift for producing trance, had no idea what he was doing. So he came up with some pretty weird explanations for how what he did worked. He mostly called it animal magnetism, which postulated that there was some sort of fluid that could be transferred from one person to another through the ether, or through water or metals. And he produced some interesting effects with this and some healing. And it didn't work out well for him because he basically formed a cult around himself, I think purely by accident. But he had no model for what was going on with him. So he made shit up. One of his followers, students, decided that animal magnetism was just too sketchy. And so he came up with the word hypnosis to describe what they were doing. Fundamentally, they still had no idea what they were doing. But they knew that they could produce trance. This was a phenomena that was around for a while. It was used in what was becoming psychotherapy. Freud used it in the beginning, but it scared the shit out of him. So he went to pure talk therapy. And we didn't really have any meaningful advances in hypnosis as a tool for change until Milton Erickson, in my humble opinion. That's the story of hypnosis in the West. In other places, they don't use the word hypnosis. But it's been around for a very, very long time. And it is a way of inducing states that are conducive to change. One of the most common ways to do this is through story, which is where Erickson came to as well. Erickson did a vast amount of his personal work with people using metaphor, telling stories in such a way that it induced change in the person. And this is the thing to understand, that there are stories in the world that will change you if you listen to them. And the reason that they will is that embedded within the story are instructions for change. Two examples of this are Rumi's Mathnavi, this vast book of poetry, and that is just stories and poetry and all of this sort of thing. And each of them contains something within it. More obvious than that even is Attar's Conference of the Birds. And if you want to know more about that, we did I think a two-part talk on that some time ago, and I'll find links to it and put them up at the end of this. Attar's Conference of the Birds contains the instructions for awakening. Plain and simple. It doesn't work particularly well in English. It works much better in the original Farsi. And the only problem with that is you have to understand Farsi. You can't just listen to the sound and expect to change in any significant way, because you have to be able to understand and follow the instructions within the text at an almost unconscious level. And that means that you're dealing with language. Does this make sense so far? Any questions,
Yeah,
thoughts?
it's important to.
Mushtaq, does the same hold true for the stories in the Quran?
Oh,
And
absolutely. The
I'm
Quran
guessing,
is one long example of this. And again, there's a reason why people who know say that you can't translate the Quran, because the stories will not carry the same meaning. So the stories within the Quran follow this. This is something that goes all the way back probably to Sumer. There are two concepts, and I mentioned it in the description, the concept of the May and the concept of the Nam-Shub. May were instruction sets. If you wanted to learn to brew beer, you would go to the temple, and if you were acceptable, they would initiate you into the May of beer brewing, which is to say that they would initiate you into the deep learning of doing this. And there were May for lots and lots of stuff when you read these things. This goes back even further than this, but this is the first historic stuff we have on it. So you have the May, which are instruction sets, and you have Nam-Shub. Nam-Shub is, it means like magical speech. It is an incantation, a spell, if you would, an enchantment. Probably the most famous of these is the Nam-Shub of Enki. Enki was a Sumerian priest king who was deified. You know the story of the Tower of Babel, how God gets pissed off at the people of Babel and screws with their languages? Everybody knows that story, right? What most people don't know is that that story was plagiarized from the story of the Nam-Shub of Enki, which was maybe 4,000 years older than that story when Babel was written down. Enki decided that he would confuse the speech of humans. And I just happen to have the Nam-Shub of Enki here. And I'm going to read it to you. Fortunately, I'm reading it in English and not Sumerian, so it's not going to completely screw up your speech. But when Enki spoke this to humanity, they could no longer communicate with each other in the way that they had. It goes like this. This is from a translation by Noah Kramer and John Mayer's The Myths of Enki, the Crafty God. Once upon a time, there was no snake, there was no scorpion, there was no hyena, there was no lion, there was no wild dog, no wolf, there was no fear, there was no terror. Man had no rival. In those days, the land of Shubar Hamazi, harmony-tongued Sumer, the great land of the May of princeship, Yuri, the land having all of the appropriate, the land Martu, resting in security, the whole universe, the people well cared for, to Enlil in one tongue gave speech. Then the Lord defiant, the prince defiant, the king defiant, Enki, the Lord of abundance, whose commands are trustworthy, the Lord of wisdom, who scans the land, the leader of the gods, the Lord of Eridu, endowed with wisdom, changed the speech in their mouths, put contention into it, into the speech of man that had been won. And as the story goes, Enki speaking this did this. I could not find my notes on the original Sumerian for this because they're locked away in a box halfway across the country. But reading this in Sumerian in the original language, it sounds powerful. It has the same, for me, it has much the same experience of listening to the Quran in Arabic, because it has both music and meaning, and it gets right inside your head. Fortunately, my Sumerian is not good enough that it screwed up my speech. Neil Stephenson wrote a book based on this thing called Snow Crash. A lot of fun to read, should you ever get the urge to read a sci-fi book. So we would say that the Nam-Shub of Enki is a Legominism. And we're going to answer for you today, why, if there are Legominisms in the world, do they not have the effect of awakening humanity? There's a specific reason for this that is not usually mentioned. And it's weird because it's right there in plain sight. I would tell you just from my own perspective, but nobody would believe me. So I'm going to quote G.I. Gurdjieff from Beelzebub's Tales to his grandson, so everybody will know that it comes from an expert rather than me.
I'll read it.
You want to read it?
Yeah.
Go for it.
All right, so this is from chapter 25 of Beelzebub's Tales to his grandson. It says, "My dear and beloved grandfather, tell me please, what does the word Legominism mean?" Hussein asked. "This word Legominism," replied Beelzebub, "is given to one of the means existing there of transmitting from generation to generation information about certain events of long past ages, through just those three-brained beings who are thought worthy to be, and who are called initiates. Well then, my boy, Legominism is the name given to the successive transmission of information about long past events which have occurred on the planet Earth from initiates to initiates of the first kind, that is, from really meritorious beings who have themselves received their information from similar meritorious beings."
There you have it. The reason that we are not all enlightened by Legominisms is that most of us are not initiates. What does initiate mean? What does that word mean? It comes from initiate and is related to initiation, of course. What does that mean? Yes, Wael.
Could it be connected to working with people that have made the intention of doing something, and therefore allowing themselves to be an initiate? So all these stories won't work if the person hasn't genuinely intended for these stories to have an effect on them. So has it got to do with the intention?
To a certain extent, yes. There's more to it, though. Initiate means to start. If I were going to make a loaf of bread, I would initiate the flour through inculcating it with yeast. And that would fundamentally change the structure of the bread. To be an initiate means that you have been started in some way. It is an initial catalyzing transformation that allows for these sorts of ideas to come in.
So I see that Jonathan is unmuted. Do you have something you'd like to share?
Yes, Jonathan, please.
Yes, I answered this question because I read it, the question in the preamble, and what I came up with was that you have to be dissatisfied or unsatisfied with your life as it currently is. And that's what you need to do, is like step away from your life. It's as it currently is, to search for a new type of life. So before initiating something new, you have to stop your current direction in life to be open-minded enough to start something, initiate something new, which would be a life with different life values.
That's absolutely correct. Did you somehow get my notes? He got my notes, Noor. He hacked my computer and got my notes because that was going to be where we were going next. What you're talking about is what we call Mathnavi afel, which is the realization that your life as it is totally unsatisfactory. It does not work. It is not where you want to go. And that will be part of the story tonight for those of you who can tune into it. But yeah, you are absolutely totally correct in that. I can't even find one tiny bit of incorrect to argue with you. Damn it. So bear that in mind. In order to be open to initiation, something within you has to be utterly dissatisfied.
So does it start from within or without?
Depends. I personally think that initiation can start in a number of different ways. You know, we have the stories of Khidr coming and initiating people. You know, so that's sort of a divine initiation. We have spontaneous moments of awakening that can act as an initiation. But the most common way is handing down from teacher to student. It's still personal. The teacher just hits you with the Zen stick in whatever form it takes. Sufis don't have Zen sticks, they have Nasruddin stories.
Yeah, with me, I didn't personally. I was not dissatisfied or unsatisfied with my life. I came into teachings or path through one of the other routes, and what Noor read in the out of Beelzebub's Tales, it mentioned being in contact with one of these special people.
Yeah.
Well, I think my brother is an example of that. So I got under his influence from an early age, as a teenager already. So that's what happened with me. So
yeah. there is no one particular way that it has to happen. If somebody tells you that I don't know who this person is. If somebody tells you that there is only one way to be initiated, they're probably trying to sell you something. And be cautious. Check your wallet. And then keep your hand on it the whole time you're talking to them.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember for me what it was. I think it was dissatisfaction with my life. So I think we all have our own stories, I'm sure, about how we ended up sitting where we are right now.
Yeah. And for most people, for almost all people, even really big dudes like Ibn Arabi, you come into contact with people who can further your initiation, which opens you to the ability to be transformed through Legominisms.
Yeah, that's certainly the place I was in when I first came across this group, which was a very fortuitous circumstance.
Yeah. One can hope. So here is this idea. And the idea is that you can contain within you the possibility of gathering this knowledge, the transmission of information. And it says about long past events. But my sense is that he's not talking about who stole whose cow in the last century. He's talking about transformative techniques that have existed and are being passed down to this very day. So, some Sufis are masters of what we would call hypnosis. Only they don't call it hypnosis. We call it karamat. Karamat does not mean magical powers, though it's often translated as that. It means charismatic power. The power of transferring information from one person to another through the ability to make deep and profound connection, because that's what charisma is. We've talked about this. So when Noor or I work with somebody, inshallah, we make a connection with them. And that connection allows what small tidbits of information we might have for them to be transmitted from one to another in such a way that it becomes usable by the receiver. This is high art. It's also science. It's both science and art. The process is science. The delivery is art. see people moving around. What do you think? Yes, Zach. I was talking to you. What do you think?
Yeah, there's a very interesting enneagrammistic way to see the Nam-Shub
Yeah.
of Enki. Because it's almost like humanity was in this harmonious, uniform stage, and there was no need for change, but to explore new things. And so the entrance point in this story, I think, is the universal harmony that underpinned everything before the story. So like once upon a time, there was no snake, no scorpion, and so on.
Yeah.
And then the state of readiness, because there was a single language. And then the action was changing the existing stagnation. So yeah, like I've been kind of like toying with the idea of putting or calcing this story on the Enneagram, and I feel like it's a good fit.
It's a very good fit. Yeah.
Makes me wonder if all the other hypnosis or all other stories follow the same pattern,
They
because the
do.
pattern is inherently human and kind of like that gives
Yeah.
you know like the
Yeah. In general, they do. The good stories do. And yeah, this has been an area of interest of mine for decades. And I've actually worked with a friend who is a fairly famous writer and helped him to actually plot his stories using the Enneagram. Not the Enneagram of personality, of course, but the real one.
Yeah.
And
I wonder if sorry.
Go ahead.
I was wondering if Neil Stevenson also did the same thing.
I don't know. I don't know him. So he definitely tapped into some interesting ideas in that book. When I read it, I went, holy crap, this guy actually did his research.
Sorry, what book is that?
Snow Crash.
Yes, okay.
Sorry, I would think by now everybody has read that book. So let's look at that idea of language scrambling and moving from a state of innocence into a state of knowledge, because there's another very, very popular story about that. And it goes like this. Once upon a time, God decided to plant a garden, and he planted it between the 4 rivers. And he put all manner of wonderful trees and bushes and flowers in the garden. And he looked at the garden and he said, this is good, but it's missing something. I know. What I need is conscious beings to appreciate the garden. Then I can perceive their reflection. So God created what we now know as a man and a woman and put them in the garden. And he said, okay, have all the food you want, but don't eat of the fruit of this one particular tree. That tree over there, don't eat the fruit there. And so they did for the longest time. And then God went to one of his favorite sons and said, dude, go down there and convince them to eat the fruit. And so his favorite son put on a disguise and went down there and talked with the woman and the man and said, you can eat this fruit. It won't kill you. As a matter of fact, it will transform you. This is the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil. And so the woman, being braver than the man, which is usually the case. People don't realize this, but it's often the case. Tried the fruit, and her eyes were opened, and she understood good and evil. That means she developed a conscience. She awakened. And not wanting to be alone with this, she grabbed her man by the throat, shook him real hard, and said, "Eat the damn fruit." And he did. And his eyes were opened. And so God goes, excellent, because he now has conscious beings. Without the knowledge of good and evil, you're not human. Without a conscience, you're not human. And so he sent them out into the world. He kind of tricked them and said, "Oh, I'm mad at you. Go out from the garden and live your lives." But they went out and created a chain of transmission of the knowledge of good and evil that spread throughout humanity. And this is how we got conscience. It's a little bit different than the way the story is told in most cases. What do you learn from this story? If anything, don't everybody talk at once.
But God can be kind of tricky.
Oh, yes.
Crafty.
Yeah.
That entropy is human, or chasing entropy is human.
Probably that may be a little bit too refined for the story, but yes. Jonathan, you know the answer to this.
It's the oddity about people that makes them interesting rather than this sameness.
Yeah.
Can't argue with that.
Yeah, we are the odd. Either of the Yusufs, what do you think?
I find it interesting that this story can be told in two very differing perspectives, and
Yeah.
it can both be true. And yeah, I don't know. This one is somehow more comforting, I guess.
Some people would find it very disturbing.
Yeah, I could see that too.
Yeah. Yeah, and the fact that you find it comforting tells us something about you. You are, in fact, part of the weird. And that's a good thing.
Yep. Alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah.
So,
Yeah, how about you, Turkey Yusuf?
Turkey, got to say it right now.
I'll work on it.
Yeah. Knowing or realizing the difference between good and evil. Actually, maybe we can talk about good and evil also. What good means, what evil means. But the fact is, human has actually ability to differentiate things. Before eating that apple, maybe they are not properly appreciating all the garden of God. They were living in there. It is most like it's something like childhood or like a baby.
Exactly right.
So having that consciousness and falling down to the earth is a child growing up. And yeah, actually, this story has been told just opposite way because of, I don't know, maybe after that story you can teach people you have to be good to go back that garden. So it is much easier to understand maybe. But the thing is, being in that state, in that garden, is not so much human. To have a consciousness and to live in this kind of world in which we are living is actually it makes possible to person to, so to say, climb up to the reality. So this story is also told by I think Ibn Arabi, also that kind of, from that kind of perspective. So yeah.
Yeah, I would like to claim the origin of understanding this, but I learned it from people like Arabi. Yeah. But yeah, you are exactly 100% correct. This is becoming adult. Conscience, and this is, Sufis are weird because we talk in favorable terms about stuff that upsets a lot of people. Like, we understand that Lucifer was not a bad person. That
Yes.
there is a secret in there, and we like dogs. So, as I've said before, the entire Garden of Eden event was a setup. And it was a setup specifically to give humans conscience and to understand the difference between good and evil. Now, some people have co-opted this and they go, oh, good is following the laws of God. And let me tell you what the laws of God are. And that includes giving me lots of money because God wants me to be rich. For those who've been listening to Joel, what's his face?
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So there's another story. I'm stealing this from one of my favorite fiction writers, a fellow by the name of Terry Pratchett. And I'm going to paraphrase it because I don't have it in front of me. So, an old witch and a young priest are sitting on a rock talking. And the young priest explains to her that there's a lot of exciting stuff going on in the realm of theology these days. And he says, we've been talking about the nature of evil. And Granny, who's the witch, says, ah, again it, are you? And he says, well, yeah, but it's not black and white. And Granny goes, yeah, it's exactly black and white. Gray is just white that got grubby. And evil, my boy, is only one thing. It is treating the other or the self as an object. And the priest goes, no, it's much more complicated than that. And Granny says, when people say that, that means they just didn't like the answer they heard. Evil, my boy, is treating people as things. And again, the priest objects, and she says, no, it all starts with that. It all starts with treating people as things. That, my boy, is evil. And that is what the two people in the garden learned. If you think about a tiger will very happily leap upon a gazelle and tear its throat out, kill it, take its life away, and then devour its body. And it will not feel at all anything about that, because to the tiger, the gazelle is just a thing. It's a meal. We were given the opportunity to have a deeper understanding. This is the meaning of being a three-brained being, according to Gurdjieff. Well, no matter what the Gurdjieff groups say. Being a three-brained being means that you have the possibility of conscience. You have the possibility to be more than just the tiger that devours the gazelle. And we learn ways to transmit that through stories.
Jonathan, did you have something you wanted to share?
Yeah, the the paths of wealth and fame and power have got a lot of bad rap, but I think there's actually nothing wrong with them. I think they're good to pursue. They can be teach you a lot about life and can be a very interesting journey. But there's one very important thing you need to know, and that is they all will lead to a dead end. And in other words, at some point in your life, you'll be as rich as you're ever going to be, as famous as you're ever going to be, and as powerful as you're ever going to be. And when you reach that dead end, it's time to give up with that path and go look for something different.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. At one time, I had a school where I taught hypnosis. It was incredibly successful, and I was making money hand over fist. And one day I looked at the fruits of my labor, gave away everything that I owned that I could not fit in the back of a pickup truck, dropped the school, closed it, and moved into a teepee in the mountains of Colorado because of exactly that realization. But it's not the money, it's not the power, it's not any of that. It's the conscience. If you have conscience and you have money, you will act as an adult. If you have power and you have money, you will act as an adult.
If
you have power,
conscience.
money, and conscience.
Yeah.
Sorry.
What else?
Mushtaq, could you just explain to me what was the reason in terms of the story that you're saying and the subject? What was the reason for you to close the school that you were financially successful in and then go
live on top of a mountain in a teepee?
Yes.
Literally.
Would you mind?
The reason was that while I was accomplishing some things, I was not accomplishing the core thing. And for me, the core thing was to produce people who were awake. And I wasn't doing that. I had to drop back 10 and punt on that so that I could circle around and figure out what I was doing wrong.
Sports ball.
Sports ball. I like myself the occasional sports ball metaphor.
Yeah, sometimes, I mean, I went through that myself. I was quite different context, and the details are not important, but I gave up a profession because I realized applying conscience, applying adult thinking about future consequences and realized, oh, this is not going to feel good down the road. And so I made a polite exit.
Yeah.
And I don't regret it at all.
Yeah. And for me, part of it was realizing that I was making very powerful people who I could not trust because their conscience was not developed.
Yeah. I was worried that that was going to happen to me. And I didn't want to see what would come of it.
Yeah. And my conscience probably needed more development too, because if it was as good as it is now, I wouldn't have made the choices that I made within that school.
To set it up along the
Yeah.
way. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah. It takes time. It takes development,
Yeah.
maturity. And it can be
It's
really tough to give those things up in transition, but
Yep.
it matters.
Yes,
So we
Yusuf.
should. Yes, sorry, Yusuf.
no, you're good. I was just saying, it seems like with that skill, especially hypnosis, seems like you have to be very particularly careful about how and who you teach it to, because it can be,
Yeah.
it can lead to a lot of danger, especially like that one tool. I'm thinking a lot back to my sales experience and this sort of thing.
Yeah. And I'm thinking back to one of my teachers who murdered somebody and managed to get off by fundamentally hypnotizing the jury.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
That's a story for another time.
That's insane.
Yeah, it really was. So, what have we not covered on this? What do we need to know to make this complete?
Munib.
So yeah, I was wondering how guilt or feelings like guilt relate to having a conscience. Is
Guilt
that a
does not relate to having a conscience, strangely enough.
Sorry, what was that?
And I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. But
sure? So I was just wondering what's the feedback mechanism there, which is inbuilt with regards to the knowledge of good and evil.
the feedback mechanism has zero to do with guilt. It has everything to do with empathy and compassion. Guilt is a tool of manipulation, along with shame. If I want to manipulate somebody, the easiest way for me to do that is to make them feel guilty, ashamed, or angry. Those three emotions, none of which, anger has its values. Guilt and shame have no value as far as I'm concerned. You can replace guilt with compassion. It's the positive, whereas guilt is the negative. And there are stories that help do that. The Mathnavi is one gigantic text on how to have empathy and compassion when you read it correctly. And again, it helps to read it in Persian. But some books are so powerful that even in translation, you get enough of what they're offering.
Rumi's like that for sure.
Rumi is like that. Yunus is like that.
Mm.
Attar is like that. Sadi, the great Sufi poets are like that. Arabi is like that sometimes when he doesn't start loving his words too much. Or covering his ass, as the case may be.
Thank you. That makes a lot of sense. Thank you.
Cool. So as a final thing to offer you here, a final thought, and we will still continue talking about this. A friend of mine wrote this a couple days ago, and I thought it was brilliant. And it says, if your reform is too far ahead of its time, few will understand it, and it will stir up anxiety and be hopelessly misinterpreted. The changes you make must seem less innovative than they are. And that is the heart, in some ways, of using Sufi stories to affect change. On the surface, it has to just be this fun, entertaining story. Underneath that, there has to be a set of instructions that operate oftentimes below the level of consciousness so that they won't freak people out.
Well, sorry.
Mushtaq, would you mind saying that again if you can? The changes you make must be less. What was the word you used?
Innovative.
Yeah, I will read it for you again,
Mhm.
and Noor will, believe it or not, where am I?
You want me to put it in the chat?
Yeah, put it in the chat.
That would help. Thank you, because it sounded very significant to me.
It is quite significant. It says, if your reform is too far ahead of its time, few will understand it, and it will stir up anxiety and be hopelessly misinterpreted. The changes you make must seem less innovative than they are. This is incredibly important today because right now we're in a downturn of civilization. We are moving deeper and deeper into the sedimentation of consciousness as a species. Not just here in America, though. I think we are taking the lead on this because conscience is hard to find these days. And people are worshiping kings again. And that never turns out well. If you are a child, you want a strong daddy to lead you, even if the daddy is mean and dangerous. That's what we see, for instance, with the people who follow Trump. They want a daddy, and he plays the role of the tough daddy. And I was listening to a couple of MAGA dudes yesterday saying,
Oh yeah.
we'll just do whatever he says. We don't care. You
It
know, if
was
he ends democracy, that's fine with us. We just want to follow him.
if he wants to be a dictator, that's okay. I mean,
Yeah.
that was oh my gosh, I've never been so thrown by MAGA commentary as I
Yeah.
was by that.
But that's no different than the people who follow the Ayatollahs in Iran, who
Yeah.
follow the mullahs in Saudi Arabia, who are following the Wahhabis. and the so-called Salafis who aren't.
I see heads nodding.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, this is not unique to the mega people. This is epidemic in humanity right now.
I, even in spiritual circles, we have to be
Yes.
careful about that, right? I mean,
Oh yeah. What passes for spiritual circles is usually a personality that everybody worships.
mhm.
And some of them play off of it.
Yeah. I mean, I know you personally are very resistant to the idea of being the daddy figure of a group.
Yeah,
Yeah.
this is anathema to me.
And some people come looking for that.
Yeah.
You know, Jonathan, you've been very patient. What would you like to say?
Well, yeah, I could say, well, here's a man of conscience. Why don't I study his behavior very carefully and mimic it? Then I could become a man also of conscience. But I know that that's not the solution.
No.
And that if I'm going to find conscience, it's in another location that's only a small step away from where I am, but it's in a step, it's a level, just one level higher than where I'm at. So it appears to be very difficult to reach. So as if you're a man of conscience, I seek your company so I can be inspired to make that step and discover this this source of conscience myself.
Yeah. And anybody who truly has conscience is going to say to you or anybody else, it's not me, it's you. You're the one who does the work. You're the one who does the transformation. My state doesn't matter, except insofar as I can point you at some stuff. That whole don't worship the finger, look at the moon.
I think it can be inspiring to be around others who have qualities that you admire and would like to emulate. But yeah, it all comes back to being able to find that within yourself. To dig up your own source, as you know, you were saying, the source is,
Yeah.
it's within
And,
reach. That's
yeah.
the
And we have a tendency to want to deify these people. I mean, Jesus came out and said, greater works than I do, you will do. Everybody forgets that. And instead, we put him up on his cross on a pedestal and worship him.
that
That's
sounds pretty lonely,
yeah.
actually.
And but that's not what he wanted.
Mhm.
The really wonderful thing about the Prophet Muhammad is that he made sure that everybody understood that he was just a dude. He was a good dude.
I'll take care of it.
Yeah. But he was just a dude. Am I going to go to hell for saying that?
Some people are very mad at you right now.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing, but yeah, we like to deify people who have seemed to have found their way as opposed to finding our way. And Sufi stories, the real ones, will tell you over and over again, find your way this is something that can help. Even the simple ones. You know the story of Mullah Nasruddin. One morning, he's out in front of his house and he's looking all over the place for something. And his neighbor comes up and says, Mullah, what are you looking for? And he says, I lost a gold piece. And so he starts helping him, and they're not finding anything. And the neighbor says, where did you last see it? And he said, in the house, in my bedroom. And he says, why aren't you looking in there? And the mullah says, because it's dark in there. Simple story, right? Has a little punchline. We all go, ha, 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 ha. But what does that actually say? If you're going to find the gold, you have to look in the darkness. You can't be where you've always been and stay in the comfort of the light. So we make our stories seem less innovative than they actually are, because then they're not threatening. Most people will not get much of anything from Sufi stories, from Legominisms of any sort, because they are not initiates. The job of a teacher is to bring all of their students to the state of initiation, to the state of starting. This is not, oh, I'm going to bless you and all of that stuff. That is literally to help a student reach the point, as Jonathan described, where they're disgusted with everything that they've had, realizing that it's not going to take them anywhere. To achieve it's not a true fana in the sense of you're not being annihilated, but your love of the world, as it were, is being annihilated. The fana fi afel. And that's the starting point. And you can't get anywhere without that starting point. And most people don't want that. Back when I was a practicing hypnotherapist, I came to the conclusion that most people don't want to be awake. They just want to be having good dreams. And there's nothing wrong with that. People deserve good dreams. Why have nightmares when you can have good dreams? But good dreams is not awake. Any more thoughts and questions? Answers. I'll take answers.
Yeah. Go for it, Yusuf.
The story you told, you Sumerian. So it says there was one language
Yes.
once upon a time. So I understand that this was not a language as we understand today, like
No.
English or Turkish. So this has to be a divine language. That maybe we can call it the language of God. So at that state, people were understanding what actually is going on. So, and the after that hypnosis and what you have written, so people cannot understand each other anymore. And it has nothing to do with different languages as we understand today's languages. Even if we can speak in our mother tongue, for example, for me, Turkish, I cannot even understand some other person who also speaks Turkish, because our something other than language, other than literal or verbal transaction is happening. And
Yes.
this happens to us because of the hypnosis of the life. So the life happens, and then every single person, I understand the life itself, the world itself, as a source of hypnosis. First, it puts us in a deep sleep, and then we try to wake up from that kind of from that hypnosis. And the Legominism is actually something that it is not. It is like a poke. It pokes something inside us, something
Yes.
deep, and it has nothing to do with the verbs or with the literal meanings of the, because it's not always literal, as I know, as much as I know, because a Legomanism can be also a painting or
Yes.
a statue or something like that. So so there is yeah, the life or the world being source of hypnosis. That was something that struck me recently. So the God has built this world like God wants to us first go deep into a sleep, and then he wants us to find our way to wake up.
Yeah. Interestingly, and what you're describing is going to be the topic of tonight's talk. I think several of you have gotten my notes somehow. Imam al-Ghazali has written extensively on this, and especially talking about the language of Allah. And it's fascinating to see what he says, because it's right along the lines of what you're describing. Imam al-Ghazali says, the language of Allah has no words. It has no voice. It has no letters. It is pure transmission, to paraphrase very, very briefly. And it may be that we all spoke that language before the Tower or the Nam-Shub or whatever it was. But if that is taken away from us, then we have to learn how to connect with each other. And learning is struggle, and struggle builds muscle.
Builds character.
Yeah, if you want to be strong, you have to operate against resistance. And this is true on every level. It's true on the level of the physical, the mental, the emotional, the spiritual. And swinging kettlebells is just a metaphor for polishing your soul. So, if I have lost my ability to speak directly to another person in the language of the divine, then I have to find my way back to that. And that is the skill that is required for telling a good story. If you're a dervish, if you're a sheikh who is telling his circle a story that wants to transform them, they have to have that ability to touch on that primordial wordless language. That's a whole, I mean, that's like a month's worth of topics just in your thought right there. So
We will keep that in mind,
yeah.
actually. Thank you.
Did that make sense to yourself?
Thumbs up,
Good.
yes. Great.
One of the things I've been thinking about from the story of Babel is that there's a sense in which the story in the Bible about speaking in tongues in its original sense rather than the mishmash that modern groups use it is really the reverse of that.
Yes,
Because
it really
they were
is.
able to talk and everybody could understand them no matter what their normal language was.
Yeah, everybody knows what he's talking about in Acts, which is part of what Christians arrogantly call the New Testament. All of the apostles, after Jesus ascends to heaven, are gifted. The Holy Spirit comes down, and all of a sudden, when they speak, everyone understands them in their own language. If you're Phoenician, you hear them speaking Phoenician. If you're a Roman, you hear them speaking Latin. If you're a Jew, you hear them speaking Aramaic. And that's the real gift of tongues. The gift of tongues has nothing to do with glossolalia, according to Scripture. And so, yes, that's what we're aiming to. And that story, even though it's been greatly corrupted in translation and such things, gives us a hint to this, because first of all, they could only do it when they were connected to the Ruh al-Quds, the sacred breath, the Holy Spirit. And that means they had a direct connection to the divine reality at a certain level. Make sense? What do you think, Ian?
Yeah, there's another little angle that was occurring to me, which is that people who have conscience are going to understand each other in a way that people who don't will not be able to achieve.
That is absolutely correct. Yes. Why do you think that is?
Because we have to use a Gurdjieff term, objective conscience is an objective thing as opposed to subjective.
That's true. Let me suggest to you that what allows one person to understand another is what's called rapport, which is the connection that we make with each other. And there are three kinds of rapport. There is affirming rapport, denying rapport, and reconciling rapport. You may have heard these three concepts before somewhere. What you are talking about is the reconciling rapport, which most people don't ever touch. This is the rapport of coming together. Affirming rapport is pushing against something like this. Denying rapport is drawing something along like that. I'm trying to come here and touch this, and this just keeps going, and it feeds me. Reconciling rapport comes together like this, and it makes a completely different connection. Very few people have the ability to produce this kind of rapport in another person, and have to rely on the first two.
Yeah, I must admit, the idea of applying, affirming, denying, and reconciling to rapport is a concept that I don't know quite how to make of that, or quite what affirming and denying rapport means. I mean,
Yeah, that's something that we would have to talk about at length, and we may do that
I
because
was
it's an
just gonna
interesting
say
subject.
that sounds like a whole topic unto
Yeah.
itself.
well, you can throw that into your
Sure, into the pot, the pool, yeah. Because I do think that may deserve some clarification. But I think the gist of it is that there are different ways to relate to one another, to influence one another. And some of that involves, leading more aggressively, like, here's what you do. Some of it is more like enticement, like,
Yeah, follow me if you want.
yeah. And then when you have a real meeting of the minds where it is a mutual inspiring.
And
I
this
would think
is
of
why
that.
Sufis work in community.
Yeah, that seems to me more like reconciling energy.
Yeah, that's what you want. That in the Hanukkahs and Tekkes that I've been to that are the real thing, you can feel that third rapport amongst the people there. So we have the question of how do you achieve initiation? How do you achieve launch? And the first part of the answer is want that more than you want the life you have.
Someone mentioned to me that sometimes wanting to want is the starting point.
Yeah.
And I thought that was great because sometimes we're just like, I don't know if I care enough about that. And that's okay. But if there's just a twinge in you of desire, that's something you can think on and you can meditate on.
Yeah. And here's the tricky part. That sometimes it happens by accident, but it is complete accidental. It is not anything intentional. And sometimes if you're hanging around with the right people, there will be an intention for you to want that somehow gets under your skin. So that's about all I got to say about this subject.
And I'm looking forward to this evening for sure.
Yeah, it's going to be fun.
Yep, same here.
Good.
Yeah, this evening's going to start with Once Upon a Time. Those famous magic words guaranteed to transport you across the universe.
Well, last call for thoughts. But otherwise, I know that I am hungry for lunch now.
Yeah, lunch is going to be a little ways away.
All right. So let's head to Brady Bunch mode, shall we?
We are, in fact, in Brady Bunch mode.
Excellent. Well, everyone, it's been so good to see all of you. I love spending this time together. as often as we get to. It's lovely. And thank you so much for showing up and contributing. It means a lot just to have your presence. Meeting of the minds and all, right?
Yeah.
All right. So we will see you this evening at 6:30 p.m. Pacific time. My God, I don't know if I mentioned that this morning, but
Doesn't matter.
Pacific time. All right.
People will either get the message or they won't.
Yes. All right. So we can wave to each other, wave to everybody watching on the replay.
And we will see you later.